Dan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on. So we don't know each other on a personal level necessarily, but we have known each other for quite a long time. I believe, if I remember correctly, that your company, 490 Biotech, and my first startup, Go Grab Lunch, were both on What's the Big Idea, the pitch competition here in Knoxville back in, what was it, 2010 or 2011 when you guys won it. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that was the first time that we crossed paths, although I've seen you plenty since then.
Sure, sure. And of course, that's part of just both being in the startup community and then my involvement at Fairview Technology Center and 490 being inside Fairview Technology Center. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background?
Sure. I am a research scientist by training. I started out with just a general degree in biology. I was working up at Northwestern University Medical School, living downtown Chicago in
Wow.
one of those apartments straight out of Blues Brothers, where every time the train went by, every dish rattled, and it happened so often that you didn't even notice it.
How funny.
Uh, Ended up leaving Chicago to come down to Knoxville and do my graduate work. So I got very, very interested in using biotechnology for applied detection systems.
Okay, so what? So
Basically,
did you do your undergrad in Northwestern? Is that right?
did my undergrad out in St. Louis,
St.
actually.
Louis. Okay.
Yeah, was then working up at Northwestern in a lab doing research into alcoholism and clinical applications.
Interesting. And what led you to Knoxville? Was it PhD study or?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
I was Dr. Gary Saylor at the University of Tennessee was running a fantastic program for the development of sensors, biological sensors, and I was really interested in it and wanted to learn more. So I came down here to work with him, and I haven't managed to escape yet.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we're glad you're down here. Hopefully you enjoy it down here. I know you are a bit of an outdoorsman, I believe, a fellow trail runner and runner in general. I know we've crossed paths on some runs too. So where you've beat me at that too. So you just tend to beat me at everything that we do together. But congratulations on all that. Before we get into the actual company and the founding of 490 Biotech, maybe just for context, you could give listeners an idea of if they're not familiar with the idea of biotech in general, just a quick summary of what it is.
Sure. The way that I like to explain biotech is humans go through a lot of different approaches to engineer things for specific applications. But if you look around in nature, it turns out that usually there's some organism, a bacteria, a yeast, anything up to a fish swimming around in the sea that has naturally developed the process that we're attempting to engineer. So whether that's making chemicals, whether that's performing enzymatic reactions, basically all the things that happen behind the scenes to make the products that people enjoy, nature has a way to do. And the problem for us is that usually it's one little piece here, one little piece there. Things are very specialized.
I see.
Biotechnology reaches out, finds all those pieces, and puts them together into a single biological platform. So basically, harnessing what nature's already created to achieve the ends that mankind wants.
How neat of a way to think about it. That's a fantastic summary. Have you always been interested in those type of studies, or what was it that drew you to biotech?
Yeah, I really was. It was I had been doing some research for a project I was working at Northwestern, and it was the first time that I came across what we call a biosensor, which is where someone has engineered an organism to go out into the environment and to find something of interest. And actually, the subject was looking for the presence of undiscovered landmines. Someone was trying to make a safe way to detect these in third world countries and find them without having to put any humans at risk. And I thought that idea was just incredible. And the more that I learned about it, the more applications for that sort of technology I found. And I really wanted to get involved with engineering these organisms to do things that were highly useful for people.
How neat. And so what led you to, maybe you could run through the story of how you go from, working through PhD at the university and sort of the founding. Do you remember so you have a partner in 490 Biotech. Has it always been the two of you? And maybe you could run us through that story of sort of when you realized, we have something here that we should work on.
Yes. So the technology that we have actually grew directly out of the work that I was doing at University of Tennessee for my graduate project.
Okay.
I was young and naive as a scientist when I started. So I agreed to a project described as high risk, high reward. It was something that my primary investigator had been interested in for about 2 decades, and no one had gotten to work. And at the time, I didn't realize that meant this will most likely take you forever. You will not graduate soon, and you'll be very frustrated. And instead, because back then I was very optimistic about science,
Sure.
I took that to mean, well, this is a great opportunity to do something that's never been done before. Well, it turns out that we were actually able to achieve that goal, which was the core technology for what eventually became 490 Biotech. And that was, we were trying to engineer a new detection system that was compatible with any cell type. So it would work in bacteria, it would work in yeast, it would work in human cells for pharmaceutical applications. And most importantly, it would be fully self-contained. So it was completely autonomous in the way it functioned, which would give us a universal platform for sensing and reporting. So basically, all the things that I had been interested in going into graduate school, creating a master key so that we could do that type of detection in any system we wanted against any type of detectable component that we wanted. So that was the work that I got into at University of Tennessee. And up until that point, we had been fairly successful in its development. We had it working in bacteria, we had it working in yeast, but we couldn't make that jump up to human cells. So we were never able to get into anything that had any sort of really pharmacological or industrial impact to it. And I was able to come up with some very interesting genetic ways to get this system to work within those types of hosts. And we were able to, the first time, demonstrate the production of light continuously from a human cell. So basically, we were able to give them a language that we as people could interpret to look at how healthy those cells were.
So the light would sort of illuminate in a larger volume to sort of give you a legend or a key for what was going on? Is that?
Yes. Yeah. Thankfully, I'm not the smartest person. So when I develop things, I try to make them as simple as possible. And our system works very easily. It's the more light that's produced, the more metabolically active and healthy the cell is, and the less light that's produced, the less healthy the cell is.
Okay.
So it actually gives us a very easy way to track cellular health dynamics over time.
Interesting. And do you remember sort of working through that study along the way? Was it most entrepreneurs tend to have a sort of a given moment when they go, I got something here, and I might want to make a business out of this. Do you happen to have a similar story where you remember that moment?
Yeah, so our development was a long time coming on the academic side, but it was when we first demonstrated the possibility of the system. And what really set it apart from the existing systems that are out there was everything else gave people a single snapshot of cellular activity. So it was basically the equivalent of using a Polaroid camera, where they could very quickly take a picture, see exactly what was going on, and then make decisions.
Right.
And our technology, because it worked in real time, was the equivalent of switching from a Polaroid camera up to a camcorder. So we could now start to track these things and see what was happening dynamically. So when we first released our publication detailing how we did this, we had a lot of people that would write to us and say, wow, we'd really like to use this system because we've never been able to address this problem before. Or it would be very interesting for us to see how this changes over time. And it would be way too expensive to do it using 300 samples, but it'd be very easy for us to do it using one sample that we could check out 300 times. And, as we started fielding more and more requests for this system, and people saying, well, I see you have it doing this, but could you have it do this other thing? Or could you make it do something new for us? We start to think, with all this interest, maybe people would actually be willing to pay for this.
Right. So you were almost getting validation just from having put out the research by people calling and saying, wow, could we use it for this? Could we do this? So your target market was almost feeding you the direction that you really should go. And good for you
Yeah,
all.
we were very fortunate because a lot of people have to really go out and seek feedback from potential end users, and we literally had our end users knocking on our door and saying, "Well, here's what we'd like to
Yeah,
see.
could
Can
you
it
do this
do
more? Do more of this?
like this? Could you help us?" So we actually, when we first started the business, we had a lot of information about exactly what we had to do to get this market ready and what people were interested in. So it was a very good problem to have. When on day one we opened shop and said, "Okay, here's what it's going to take to make this successful."
Had you planned on turning it into a business, or because of that demand, you just couldn't ignore it?
It was really because of that demand,
Yeah.
and in the beginning, it's funny, we're sort of accidental entrepreneurs. We thought it would be easier to set up a business entity in order to field all these requests and just sort of cut down on the amount of academic red tape that was involved in getting it out to people. And as we did that, it made it much easier to get it in the hands of our end users, and that only increased the amount of demand that we had for the product. So we thought, well, maybe we should start expanding this, and that's when we
Right.
really started to take the business seriously and try and grow ourselves.
So is that about the time you went into the pitch competitions to sort of go through that process and work through it, or was that maybe a little bit later on?
Yeah, it was really right after that.
Okay.
After we realized that we could do some expansion instead of just having the system we created and a vehicle to distribute that we could actually build this into a series of products that would be useful for people at different levels, is when we thought, well, now we're going to need some money to fund it. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
when we
So
started
speaking of
getting into the
funding,
pitch competition.
yeah. So speaking of funding, you guys certainly saw that as an opportunity to go and further validate your idea and raise a little bit of seed capital to do some things. Of course, I think a lot of people that are not involved in research-based, scientific-based startups don't understand the lead time that it takes to go from, idea to marketplace. And so there's a lot of lead there. If you're open to it, if you could share just a little bit more about how you guys are currently funding yourselves.
Oh yeah, definitely. So the pitch competitions where we originally met was really the key stepping stone for us. I think we probably made the same mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs, especially people making a transition out of academia into a startup setting, make, where they expect that the funding will be basically the same as all the grants that they've been writing, and it really isn't. There's a whole different focus and a whole different application for SBIR, small business funding, for small business research. And the pitch competitions gave us the footing we needed to get preliminary data to then go to organizations like NIH and NSF, USDA, and even NASA, and say, we have this really great idea that we think addresses some needs within your commercial sector. Look what we've been able to do. Look at the validation that we've been able to demonstrate through these sorts of competitions. And that really opened the door for us to get our initial rounds of funding and start doing real R&D to develop more products.
Through the SBIR grants, correct?
Yeah. So at present, we are primarily SBIR funded. So we've sort of, if you will, graduated from some of the local pitch competitions, and we choose to leave those for the people that were in our original position, and can use that as a gateway then to more of the federal government funding for R&D development.
Sure, will make sense. Sort of moving through milestones, moving up the food chain per se. Mm-hmm. And caught a key word that I remember you sharing with the Fairview Technology Center board, your presentation. I guess it was maybe last week or the week before, but caught a word that made me think you've got an interesting tidbit that's out there now. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the NASA research you guys are going to be involved in.
Sure. Yeah. So definitely our most exciting project to date is we've partnered with an organization called CASIS, the Center for the Advancement of Science and Space, which handles all of the R&D funding through basically the equivalent of an SBIR program for NASA. And their main mission is to commercialize low Earth orbit. So not just SpaceX is interested in using low Earth orbit to make money. So there's really a big push now to see how can we start doing things like biotech in this environment. And when people first hear that, they think, why would we want to do this in space? My commute is bad enough as it is. I certainly don't want to have to go to
Fly
space
to
every
space to do research.
Yeah, but it turns out from a scientific standpoint, somewhat paradoxically, the pharmaceutical development that goes on now on Earth involves growing lots of cells in dishes and treating them with compounds and seeing how they react. And ironically, growing those individual cells in dishes on Earth, they don't behave much like they do in the human body. But growing them in dishes in space, they tend to form into three-dimensional structures because they're free of gravity.
Free of gravity. I was going to ask if it was gravity that was changing things.
A lot more. So we can actually get a much better representation of human biology by growing cells in space than we can by growing them where those cells would actually live here on Earth.
So I have to ask, did you all recognize that, or did you read some research that alluded to that? How did you get the leap from that sort of finding to we could use this with 490 Biotech and therefore we should apply for a NASA
So
SBIR?
we were actually very fortunate because we met with Casis at a meeting, at a conference, and told them a little bit about our technology. And they said the main barrier that they've experienced to doing this type of research in space is the complicated nature of the existing assays and the fact that pharmaceutical companies would have to send up so many samples to take as many data points as they wanted. And they saw our technology with its continuous reporting ability as a way to both simplify the way those assays are performed, so less training for the astronauts on the ISS, and also to significantly reduce the amount of samples and compounds that have to be put up into orbit. So they asked us to try and draw up a plan that would be sent out for review to see if we could solve that problem using our technology. So we put together the research platform that we have now. That was sent out for third-party review, and the reviewers agreed that this would be a good way to potentially address this problem. So now we're working with them to see if we can do the same type of testing that pharmaceuticals do, but to do it with significantly less weight and with significantly less complicated assays to make it available and reduce that price point for doing the experimentation in low Earth orbit.
Interesting thought process there, the mention of reducing the price point. And you would think, well, we're going up to space. How are we reducing the price point? But it sounds like you're getting better results, too, along the way with the research that happens.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, with the amount of money that it takes to develop even one functional drug compound for a large pharmaceutical, it can be a process that takes more than 10 years and over $1 billion in research. And the amount of chemicals that are screened but fail is astronomical. So anything that we can do, including sending those samples to space to get more reliable early phase testing, can significantly reduce their costs, even if you think, well, I really don't want to foot the bill for a rocket launch here.
Right.
But when you put the possible tens of millions of dollars it may take to do that work versus the hundreds of millions of dollars that it would take to screen compounds on Earth, it ends up actually being a cost benefit value add for them.
Wow, that's so intriguing to someone like me to think that through. It's just you can't even comprehend it. But that's why I'm not in the business that you're in. So fantastic stuff. So where does that go from there? I mean, is there follow-on research you think that will happen along with that, or?
Yeah, so there's really a lot of great things we're doing with that project. If we're able to demonstrate that our assay can replicate the types of assays that are currently cost prohibitive in low Earth orbit, it really opens us up then to working with Casis and with the other partnership businesses that are responsible for the logistics behind doing the research on the International Space Station. So aside from just looking at things like pharmaceutical compounds, we can actually start to get into looking at how human cells behave in outer space. Especially, we're really sitting at the birth of space tourism right now.
Right.
And we're going to start transitioning from sending astronauts with extremely rigorous physical screenings and health plans into space to sending up tourists that in all likelihood are going to be somewhat older, somewhat wealthier individuals that may not be in the prime
And in that kind of shape.
today's astronauts are in. So, understanding how existing diseases like diabetes, for example, or would react under low Earth orbit, or for someone who is in we'll just say less than peak physical condition to make a short duration space flight. Having that sort of information makes it safer for the type of people that would be likely to engage in space tourism, and even for astronauts in peak physical condition that may be on longer journeys, such as going to Mars in the future.
Right.
We can put cells up on the ISS, and because they're just cells in a dish, we can grow them up there for multiple astronaut cycles to simulate what it would be like exposed to the higher levels of radiation, to any possible contaminants that may be released into the station in simulated events. So it gives us a lot of power then to do the types of experiments that normally we wouldn't want to subject a full human to, and it would be too expensive to do with insanely large numbers of samples.
Sure. Well, taking a quick pivot just to talk about you personally as an entrepreneur, a couple questions for you if I can. Just curious, what's been sort of the toughest part of this whole process individually for yourself?
So for me, it would probably be the fact that I am born and raised a nerd. I've been on the science side of things since the very beginning. And when you first step into the entrepreneurial world, you are no longer the one job description you used to be. You are suddenly every aspect of your company.
Janitor, so, right?
I've learned to troubleshoot everything from electrical, plumbing, instrument maintenance, looking at IT, what I would call IT that an actual IT person would scoff at me.
Mock, right?
Yeah, it's been an adventure. I mean, there is so much on-the-job learning and conditioning yourself to deal with a challenge in a background that you haven't had before, and realizing that if you need the business to keep going, this has to be fixed, and it has to be fixed now, and you're the person for the job.
Is there a way you've mitigated some of that? Is there any mentors you have, or any sort of learning you've gone through besides on the job to sort of work through those items?
What I found is that a very important aspect for, at least for a first-time entrepreneur, I'm sure a serial entrepreneur may give you a different answer, but as a first-time entrepreneur, being in an area like Knoxville, where the entrepreneurial community has been very open and very welcoming, has really been key to that. Right. I can reach out to other people within our incubator facility that, maybe are working on nothing scientific at all, but say, hey, I seem to have this weird problem with our website. Have you guys done any web stuff for what you do? People have been very willing to work with us, and we found that there's never been any fear of asking questions or asking for help. Our community has been great. And, that again goes back to those original pitch competitions that we did. That was where we first started our network.
Your network, yeah.
And we were pitching against things that were not at all biotech, but just because they're not in the same field as you doesn't mean that they're just as valuable as a connection within the same field.
Yeah, I think you guys were actually the only scientific one. I don't remember the rest of the folks that were in there with us, but I know you guys were first. Carl Hughes was second, and we were third at Go Grab Lunch. And of course, your solution. And then Carl Hughes was doing, was it College Loop? I think it was a college blog. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we were doing our business-to-business networking site. So you guys were clearly the only scientific, but there was good networking even back then amongst all of us to sort of exchange ideas and what you were struggling with. So it's good to hear that the community still continues to provide that for folks like yourself. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast, is because I want people to understand that the South does startups, Knoxville does startups, and we do it pretty well. So it's good to hear you having that. What would you say has been the best part of doing entrepreneurship?
As cliche as it sounds, the best part is just that every day you get to wake up and work on something that you're really passionate about. I mean, you see, you read, you hear every day about people that talk about, 9 to 5 and soul crushing, and right. I don't know how to do this. And I mean, 9 to 5 is a distant memory after you become an entrepreneur. But
sure.
When you're doing something that you really believe in, and when you have that feeling of, if this succeeds, it's because I made it succeed.
Right.
Because I believed in it and because I drove it forward. It really, it's not as hard as the people that think I can't do 9 to 5 every day would think it would be. Those hours really stop having the type of meaning they did when you were working for someone else doing something you didn't enjoy. And you'll look up and find that, you've been there for 10 hours, you've been there for 12 hours, but you feel a sense of accomplishment where you say, it took 15 hours today to get this done, but I did it. And because I did it, my business is in a better place. And that sort of satisfaction, those moments that you have, they make what you put into it totally worth it.
Great message. Common thing we're hearing from people is the ability to control your own destiny and create something of your own. So it's so fun to hear stories like yourself where you may not have ever thought you were going to be that entrepreneur, but now here you are and you're thriving doing it. So really good stuff and really good message. Well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. We so appreciate you coming on. Real quickly, if there's anywhere, if folks wanted to connect with you or just learn more about 490 Biotech, where could they do that?
Sure. Probably the best place to learn about our technology, our business, is at our website. It's 490biotech.com. Try to make it as easy to find as possible.
Right.
And that has a little bit of background about the company, as well as a more in-depth explanation of our technology and all the cool things that we're attempting to do with it now.
Well, Dan, we really appreciate you coming on today, sharing your story.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.